Soundscape, wind across dead stalks. Distant cicadas. Then a low hum, like someone breathing into an empty jar. Narrator, low, steady. They say sound carries across the delta for miles. But on one plantation, the wind never carried a single cry. Not once. Not when the dogs were loosed. Not when the chains were drawn. And not when the masters began to vanish, one by one. In the summer of 1843, near Natchez, Mississippi, 8 men, all former slave owners, were found mutilated. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the mud. Only their bodies, drained and clean, and one word carved faintly into the floorboards of the last victim's home. Silas. The sheriff sealed the files. The town buried the story. But a century later, during renovations of the old Calder estate, a locked chest was uncovered in the foundation. Inside, burned letters, baptism records, and one journal, wrapped in animal skin. Written in a trembling hand, it began. He never spoke, but we all heard him. Narrator. Silas was born on the Calder plantation sometime between 1820 and 1825. The ledgers list him as mute, strong, docile. But locals said he wasn't born mute, that his tongue had been cut when he was barely old enough to cry. The overseer called it an act of mercy. His silence became the plantation's quietest superstition. Women claimed he appeared beside them at night, holding candles, staring as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Men swore they heard humming behind them in the fields, only to turn and find no one there. But Silas listened. He listened to everything. The whispered confessions of the Calder sons, the drunken boasts of the masters, the prayers of those who had broken him. And somewhere in that silence, he began to understand something no one else could. The sound of sin. Narrator. The first to die was Abner Calder, heir to the estate. It was May of 1843. He'd inherited the plantation, the debts, and Silas himself. Witnesses say he often forced Silas to sit at his feet during dinner, as an example of obedience. 3 nights before Abner's wedding, his bride-to-be awoke to screams, not from him, but from the stables. There they found Silas standing over the body of a horse, its throat slit, its body trembling. But Abner refused to punish him. He's not dangerous, Abner said. He just doesn't understand. The next morning, Abner was found hanging from a barn beam, trousers torn, eyes wide, a rusted sickle nearby. In the dirt below his body was a pattern, 8 small stones, arranged in a circle. No one understood it then. They would later. Narrator. Reverend Elijah Holt, a traveling preacher, visited the Calders that summer. His diary, recovered from the chest, gives the only surviving first-hand account. There is a silence upon this place I cannot bear. Even the birds fall quiet. The boy, Silas, follows me when I pray. When I close my eyes, I feel his breath at my ear. The Reverend attempted an exorcism, believing the plantation was cursed, but his words twisted in his throat. He wrote, "The silence is not absence, it is hunger." Days later, Holt abandoned his sermon mid-sentence and fled into the woods. His boots were found 2 miles away, neatly placed side by side. His tongue was nailed to the church door. Narrator. Every trace of Silas was scrubbed from public record by 1850. The Calders sold their land. The county clerk's office burned in a mysterious fire. Local papers from that decade are missing from the archives, all except a single obituary for a Calder infant, cause of death, unknown infection. But when the chest was opened in 1948, it contained something else, a folded page from the U.S. slave census schedule, every name intact except one. Silas's line had been crossed out with red ink. Beneath it, in faint graphite letters. He took what they took from him. Narrator. The second to die was Marshall Reed, a foreman from Louisiana who'd once owned Silas before selling him to the Calders. He was found in 1844, inside the bell tower of his parish school. The bell rope had been looped through his mouth, tearing the corners as it lifted him. Locals swore they heard the bell toll 13 times that night, even though the mechanism was broken. On the church floor, written in dried blood, was a crude symbol, a circle of 8, incomplete by 1. The town buried Reed quickly. The priest refused to speak of it, and no one asked where the boy who once tended Reed's fields had gone. But years later, a carpenter restoring the tower found something wedged between the floorboards, a scrap of linen with a child's handwriting. They hear me now. Narrator. By 1845, the Calder widow, Margaret, had moved north to her sister's estate. Letters found in the chest reveal she was haunted by dreams of a child humming outside the window. She wrote of hearing her late husband's voice calling her name, though he'd been buried for 2 years. One night, she wrote a final entry. The sound crawls beneath the floorboards. It waits beneath my bed. When I breathe, I feel his silence. She was discovered days later, seated upright in her parlor. No wounds, no blood, but her ears had been filled, completely, with melted candle wax. The coroner noted a faint scent of smoke and honey, as if someone had whispered into her ear before sealing it shut. Narrator. From 1843 to 1849, 7 men connected to Silas's life died in strange, symbolic ways. Hung, drowned, burned, or left with their mouths mutilated. But it was the 8th that sealed the legend. Judge Merriweather, the man who once signed Silas's sale papers, was found in his study, kneeling, his hands folded in prayer. But when the sheriff lifted his chin, they saw he'd been castrated, the wounds burned shut, his lips sewn with horsehair. His clerk swore he heard humming through the night, soft, steady, rhythmic. When they searched the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of lye and sugarcane. In Merriweather's pocket was a note, the same red ink, the same handwriting. 8 wrongs unspoken. Narrator. In 1850, Dr. Henry Voss, a physician studying Negro muteness, published a brief medical pamphlet describing a plantation boy deprived of speech who displayed no pain when cut or branded. The paper was banned. The doctor's name disappeared from medical directories, but a single copy survived, found in that same chest under layers of dust and wax. Scribbled in the margins, someone had written, "He learned to make silence holy." Voss had traveled to Natchez to find Silas. He never returned. 2 months later, fishermen discovered a crate floating downriver. Inside, surgical instruments, bloodied gloves, and a throat preserved in salt. The tongue was missing. Narrator. In 1851, the Calder plantation burned to the ground. The official report claimed lightning, but witnesses say the storm came after the smoke. The house collapsed inward, flames swirling like a funnel, and in its ashes, investigators found no bodies. Only footprints. Hundreds of them. Bare. Child-sized. Leading toward the river. But here's the strange thing. The plantation records show that by 1851, every enslaved person had already been sold. Everyone, except Silas. Some said he walked into the river that night, and the current took him. Others claimed he was never human at all, that he was the plantation's sin-given flesh. Either way, his name was never spoken again. Not in Mississippi. Not anywhere. Narrator. In 1919, after the Great War, the Sisters of Mercy purchased 40 acres of abandoned farmland near Natchez. They built a home for colored orphans and the mute of mind. Locals called it Calder Hill Home for the Voiceless. Few remembered the name Calder. Fewer spoke it aloud. The nuns reported an immediate infestation of black mold in the walls, spreading no matter how often it was scraped away. Children said they heard singing in the drains at night, and the headmistress complained of soft knocks beneath the chapel floor. One maintenance worker, Henry Glass, recorded in his logbook, "It's not the pipes, sister. It's something breathing." That entry was dated October 12, 1920, the same day the orphanage choir lost its voice. None of the children could speak again. Narrator. In 1937, an audio archivist named Louis Dandridge visited the orphanage to record the last living survivors of slavery for the Federal Writers Project. The interview tapes were stored in a government vault, but one reel was mislabeled and never transcribed. It was rediscovered in 1974. What it contains is difficult to describe. The first minute is silence. Then, faintly, you hear a man humming, a single, broken note that never changes pitch. Then, another sound emerges, the creak of wood. The hum grows louder, becomes 2 voices, then 3, then dozens. And then a phrase, low and slow, spoken in a child's whisper. We learned is quiet. The reel ends abruptly, but not before something brushes the microphone. A breath. Narrator. A handwritten confession, discovered in 1942 after Sister Adeline's death, was hidden beneath the chapel altar. The ink had bled through the paper, as if written in panic. The silence is spreading. The children no longer pray. They hum when they sleep, and the walls hum with them. We sealed the cellar, but still the water moves. I hear him below. I think he waits for the last word. Investigators found the orphanage basement flooded, no source of water ever identified. Inside that water, according to the coroner's note, were objects resembling dolls, though their faces had been smoothed blank by time. Every one of them had 8 stones placed around it. Narrator. In 1948, historian Dr. Samuel Lowring was commissioned to document the orphanage's closure. He cataloged the recovered letters, maps, and census records, including the burned chest from the Calder plantation. Lowring's notes show a steady descent into obsession. He began to compare handwriting samples between Silas's supposed journal and the nun's ledgers, claiming the loops matched, the slant identical. His final log entry reads, "There was never a boy. The silence writes itself." That night, Lowring was found in his office, his throat intact, but his vocal cords surgically removed. The scalpel was missing. His assistant later admitted hearing the phonograph playing a low hum, the same tone from Dandridge's lost recording. Narrator. In 1950, federal agents seized the entire Calder Hill site under public health code violations. All buildings were demolished, but witnesses recall seeing crates loaded into unmarked trucks, labeled Property of Bureau of Ethnological Research. The official report stated that black mold contamination was the cause of illness among staff and children. Yet photos from the cleanup show something else. Faint markings burned into the foundation, circles of 8, carved deep into the stone, each with a dark center like an eye. Locals say that when the bulldozers cut through the last wall, the engine stalled. Every man on site heard a single sound, a note, low and human, echoing from the ground. Then, silence. Narrator. In 1978, a set of classified boxes was uncovered in a decommissioned government warehouse in Baton Rouge. No agency claimed them. Inside were medical slides, broken wax cylinders, and files labeled Project SILAS. The documents describe a study of unexplained mutism clusters in rural institutions. The earliest case, Calder Hill Orphanage. Marginal notes in red pencil reference psycholinguistic contamination, the idea that silence itself could spread like a disease. One memo reads, "Test subject exposure beyond 14 minutes induces loss of speech, then auditory hallucinations. Control measures, isolation or self-inflicted muting." The report ends abruptly. The last page is stamped. Terminated due to vocal breach. Narrator. In 1991, a journalist named Eleanor Cates obtained a reel from the Project SILAS archives. She played it live on a local radio program titled The Unheard South. What aired that night lasted 3 minutes before the station cut transmission. The recording began with a man whispering, "Do not respond to the sound." Then came the hum, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable. After 40 seconds, Eleanor gasped on air and dropped the microphone. The sound peaked into distortion, then stopped. She was found hours later, unharmed but mute, scrawling words on the wall of her studio. He never stopped listening. To this day, that broadcast has never been rebroadcast or archived. Narrator. Genealogists later discovered something chilling. Every known descendant of the original Calder family had lost a child to speech-related illness, stuttering, catatonia, selective mutism. Some cases appeared out of nowhere, then vanished without treatment. One psychologist, Dr. May Turner, theorized that the trauma of slavery had created a genetic echo, a silence embedded in blood, passed like inheritance. But her private papers tell a different story. In the margins, she wrote, "When I recorded the hum from the tape, my daughter started repeating it in her sleep. It followed the rhythm of a heartbeat. I cut the power. It didn't stop." 2 weeks later, Turner was found dead of self-inflicted wounds to her throat. Her daughter never spoke again. Narrator. In 2003, the land that once held Calder Hill Orphanage was purchased by a real estate company for suburban development. During excavation, workers uncovered an underground chamber, circular, lined with clay tiles. On the walls were handprints, hundreds of them. In the center lay a human skeleton, jaw removed, ribs carved with 8 concentric rings. The county coroner recorded the remains as adult male, 30 to 40 years, and ordered reburial under state law. But the lab report filed 1 day later contained a note that shouldn't exist. No larynx detected. Cavity fused shut. The file ended with 3 words. Sample still resonant. Narrator, quiet, almost whispering. They say there's a frequency beneath human hearing, a hum that exists between sound and thought. Some call it tinnitus. Some call it memory. But on certain nights, when the air is thick and the wind carries no birdsong, if you stand where Calder Hill once stood, you can feel it. Not in your ears, but in your chest. A pulse. A rhythm. 8 beats. Pause. 8 beats. That's how he marked them. Every master, every name, every sin. And if you listen too long, you'll start to understand what Silas did. He didn't want revenge. He wanted quiet. And now he has it. Sound fades. A single hum lingers. Then nothing.